This story starts on a trip back from the beach in the summer of 2015 with my young family, and I received a phone call from my then superintendent who says, "Hey, you're coming back. We'd like to have you come into the office on Monday. I just want to talk to you about something." And I was a principal for 2 years, thought it had been going pretty well. I didn't really know what to expect when she said that. So I go in, and she says, "Hey, have a seat. So just so you know, the outgoing assistant superintendent has put in his retirement, and we would like you to take the position." And I remember thinking in my head at that moment, that doesn't really make any sense. And I remember saying, "Are you sure you don't want to interview other people?" Which is typically not how you respond to the offer of a job promotion. But this is really the inflection point as I think back over several positions I've had in my career. I was a high school teacher for 6 years, and I moved into a district-wide position at the age of 30 that I was nowhere near probably the most qualified person for, doing professional development and data analysis across a large school district in this area. After that, I became an elementary principal in a new district. Again, if you had said to me, "Hey, you're going to be an elementary school principal," at any point during my teaching career as a high school social studies teacher, I would have thought you were crazy. That led to the summer of 2015, which is where I became an assistant superintendent for personnel. And then right when the pandemic started, it seemed like a great time to change jobs. I changed districts again and was now in charge of a $145 million budget, which is the largest in our region for municipalities, school districts, or towns. And so going into each situation, there was a heavy lift that had to happen. And as I think back on those times and what I've learned and gleaned from these experiences of really on paper not being someone that the resume may match up to what the job experience is, there's been some benefits from lacking the expertise in that area, whether it's brand new as an administrator with only 6 years of teaching experience, going to new districts, going to new levels. And so there's just a couple of main points that I want to express today that I've learned and some takeaways from lacking the expertise possibly needed at that time. The first is having a bias to action. And what that means is not getting so caught up in analyzing the data, looking for the exact evidence, spending hours and hours and hours until you have the perfect solution. And this was really driven home to me in my first year as a principal. I was very fortunate to be in a district that was investing in its leadership capacity. We were working with a retired superintendent from a different area. He came down, was working with our team, and we were looking at some data sets. And I believe it was attendance data at that time. I remember him asking me, like, "Okay, Larry, what are you going to do to improve this attendance data?" And I launched into some probably really intelligent sounding jargon that educators like to use with some acronyms, and I was citing some research, and he stopped me midstream. He said, No, Larry, I know you're a smart guy, but this is not an academic question. What are you going to do? And it really struck me in that moment, as he talked about having a bias to action, that sometimes the most important thing we can do is just jump in and try something. So when it came to attendance, here's what we did. We developed a list of our top 20 most absent students. My assistant principal and I both had 10 on our list. After announcements every morning, at 9:02 a.m., she walked up one side of the building, I walked up the other, and we checked on those students. We met back in my office approximately 5 minutes later. Any student that wasn't there, we immediately called. And this wasn't like, "Hey, where is your kid? You gotta have him here." This was, "Hey, is your son still sick? What do you need? Can we come pick him up?" Really supportive. And we found just with that really simple list of 20 students we're checking on in a 5-minute process every single day, and the conversations that came out of that, we learned so much about our students, why they were coming to school, why they weren't coming to school, and really were able to make some headway in that. The second piece is really recognizing and interrupting your own biases. So this also stems from my example with attendance. One of the students that was on that list was a young man by the name of Nehemiah. Nehemiah moved to our area and into our school district in second grade. He had lived with his mother in New Jersey, spent summers with his father. Mother passes away at the end of his first grade year. He is now uprooted from Maryland into upstate New York and living with his father, whom he spent some summers with, but never during the school year. And those of us that are parents, even those of us in the education profession, know that navigating the school system is often not the easiest thing in the world. Bus times, getting on the bus, parent-teacher conferences, what does this letter mean? I remember one time he told me on a snow day he walked to school because he didn't know there wasn't school. So this is a student that I would go down and I would pick up. His dad had my personal cell phone. If he missed the bus, he would call me. We would come down and pick him up. So I'm sitting in my 2011 Sonata in Nehemiah's apartment driveway, and my phone rings. I pick it up, it's a parent. And this parent is calling me to really share some strong thoughts about conversations that her daughter was bringing home about the teacher that she had. Some of the ways that this teacher was treating some students, some sarcasm, some comments maybe about their home life. And I'm in the driveway of a student that I'm personally picking up as the building principal. Like, I thought I had it all figured out, right? And so I remember launching into a defense, and I was listening to respond instead of listening to listen, talking about the hours I put in and the this and the that, and the conversation just really started escalating. And in that moment, I kind of stopped. I said, you know what? I'm a 34-year-old at that time, white male, who's had a lot of privilege in his life. I probably don't know the experiences of some of these students. And some of those conversations really started leading to interrupting some of these biases and really valuing what I'm being told and what I'm hearing in a non-judgmental way versus thinking in my head, well, this is my experience with school, which was very positive as a student. My dad was a teacher. I chose this as a profession. But what are the experiences of students that maybe haven't had a similar background, similar experience? And so again, when you go into these new situations lacking expertise, it's important, I've learned, to realize what your biases are. What are your implicit biases? How do you recognize and interrupt them? Third, getting good at asking questions and recognizing agendas. And when I use the word agenda, that usually has a negative connotation. Oh, that person has an agenda. What I would suggest is that almost everyone has an agenda, good or bad. And a lot of times in life, it feels a little bit like the show The Bachelor, or The Bachelorette, or The Golden Bachelor, or any iteration of this show. Someone has an idea, they want you to buy that idea, or they tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you'd be really good at this. It feels really good when someone gives you the rose. But what I found in these situations is taking a step back, processing, letting the individual know, like, hey, I'm going to take some notes, I'm going to process this, and then giving that space to reflect and ask questions. Particularly when you're in a situation where you don't have all the expertise or all the knowledge that you have, it can be very, very tempting to jump to an answer, but recognizing that these agendas, for good or bad, are there has helped me take a step back, take a deep breath, and learn from those experiences. And then finally, being comfortable with ambiguous outcomes in the short term and just focusing on the next step. We often want to jump 3-4 steps ahead when we're faced with a problem, get to the solution right away. What I've had to learn as someone with a generally type A personality is that you really have to take a step back and be okay not knowing what step 4 is and step 5 are, but really just focusing on step 2. And a couple points of this. I use the analogy of hitting singles. And so one of my favorite movies is the movie Moneyball. And there's a famous scene in that movie where Brad Pitt's character is talking up a certain player who the other scouts don't seem to value. And he just keeps reiterating that he gets on base. He gets on base. He gets on base. He just takes the next step. You can't score if you don't get on base. Similarly, just making contact every day is an important piece to focus on. So it's not about always hitting the home run. It'd be great to always hit home runs. When you try to hit home runs all the time, you often also strike out a lot. And so just making a little bit of contact, a A little bit of progress every single day is an important piece. And then also learning to discipline your disappointment. The first thing we try, the second thing we try, having that bias to action may not work out, but you can always pivot, and there's usually another chance. And this brings me to the story of the 2014 Major League Baseball draft. In that draft, the Houston Astros, who at that time were not a good baseball team, had the number 1 pick. The top player in that draft was a left-handed high school starting pitcher named Brady Aiken. He was far and away the most hyped player in that draft. And he gets picked number 1 overall by the Houston Astros. Goes through his medical routine, and it's discovered that he has a slightly smaller tendon in his left throwing elbow, which increases the risk of that tendon not surviving and getting hurt in the process of pitching. So the Astros know this. They can't release that information, but now they're thinking, gosh, we want to give this guy $6 million if we know he might get hurt pretty quickly. So they don't end up signing Brady Aiken. The worst team in baseball, they have the number 1 pick in the draft, and they become the first team since 1983 not to sign their number 1 pick. So what happens is, because of that, they get the second pick in the 2015 draft, and they take a third baseman named Alex Bregman. The failure in 2014 leads to the successful pick in 2015. And in 2014, Sports Illustrated ran the cover of the 2017 World Series champions are going to be the Houston Astros. They were a very, very unsuccessful baseball team at that time. That actually came true in 2017, the cover when they win the World Series, and a key player in that was Alex Bregman. Sadly for Brady Aiken, in the first game he pitched after not being drafted by the Astros, he blows out the tendon in his left elbow. He does end up getting drafted. He does get a $2.5 million signing bonus. So he did okay at the end of the day, but the Astros' intuition was correct. And they ended up drafting the guy that would get them to the World Series. So that initial disappointment, that initial failure leads to greater things down the road. And I'll just finish with a little bit of a call to action. I've learned over the years that leading with humility and leading with vulnerability are really the 2 most important pieces that you can have, particularly when you go into situations where you're not coming in with the level of expertise that one might expect. When I was a 33-year-old elementary building principal, I had teachers that had been teaching in their grade level longer than I had been alive. I'm not going to tell them how to teach their grade. They're going to teach me how they teach their grade, and we're going to work together to make this school a great place. So having that humility, having that vulnerability, I think really puts you in a position to lead to the best of your ability. I thank you for your time, and I appreciate you listening.